My name is George. My wife thought she was so clever when she tried to divorce me right after I inherited my late mother's fortune. I was completely blindsided. I never imagined the woman I built my life with would turn on me when I was at my most vulnerable. She assumed she'd walk away with half of the inheritance. But she had it all wrong, and she was about to find out just how wrong. I met Michelle 9 years ago. We were both in our mid-20s, full of aspirations, navigating adulthood one step. At a time, our connection felt effortless. Conversations flowed, the chemistry was undeniable, and back then, we both wanted the same things. Our first few years together were filled with those small, beautiful moments. I truly believed I had found someone who would stand by me through thick and thin. But not everyone shared my enthusiasm. The first time I introduced Michelle to my mom, I could sense my mother wasn't particularly fond of her. My mother wasn't rude or dismissive. In fact, she was as polite as ever. But after Michelle left that day, my mom sat me down and said something I've never forgotten. She told me, "George, I know you're in love, but only time will tell how this truly plays out." She looked at me with the wisdom of a mother who'd seen enough of the world to spot things her son couldn't. She wasn't accusing Michelle of anything. She simply clarified, "I don't dislike her, but you're my only child, and I need you to proceed with caution." That conversation stayed with me, but at the time, I just saw it as typical motherly concern. I thought she was being overly protective. I did take part of her advice and didn't rush into marriage. Michelle and I dated for a few years before getting married. When we finally tied the knot, I genuinely thought we were ready. But looking back now, I realized my mother had picked up on something that, in my infatuation, I completely missed. Even after we got married, the relationship between Michelle and my mom remained the same, cordial but distant. There was never any big fight or argument, just a noticeable gap. My mother stayed polite but reserved. The kind of reserve that signals she's observing everything but won't speak up unless absolutely necessary. She never tried to meddle in our marriage. She respected my decisions, even if she didn't agree with them, but she never grew close to Michelle either. There were no long chats over tea or shared bonding moments between them. At the time, I convinced myself it was normal. Not everyone becomes best friends with their in-laws. I figured as long as they weren't openly hostile, it was fine. The first few years of our marriage were mostly stable. We had the usual ups and downs, learning to cohabitate, adjusting to each other's habits, figuring out how to build a life. Together, we had our disagreements, like any couple, but nothing major. I had spent years working a stable corporate job. It was secure, but unfulfilling. I had this strong desire to create something of my own, to stop trading my time for someone else's dream. So, 2 years into our marriage, I took the leap. I left my job to launch my own agency. It wasn't a reckless decision. I had done my research. I saved up, and I built a small team. For a while, things were going okay, but then one of my employees made a huge mistake on a major project. It was a complete disaster. We didn't just lose one client, we lost our 2 biggest ones. They pulled out immediately, and the agency's lifeline was severed. Those 2 clients accounted for more than half of our revenue. When they left, it felt like the floor disappeared from under me. I tried to stay calm and rebuild. I reached out to potential new clients, updated our pitch deck, and chased every lead I could find. But none of them came close to filling the void. The agency went into what I can only describe as survival mode. We were technically still operating, but without enough income to stay afloat. Every week, I watched our balance dwindle. Every night I went to bed knowing the numbers just didn't add up anymore. After 2 months of trying to hold it all together, the stress began to spill into our home life. The bills didn't stop, and groceries didn't buy themselves. I did my best to keep the household running, but it wasn't enough. Michelle wasn't having it. The patience I thought she possessed had vanished. She became cold, angry, and resentful. I hoped she would step up even just a little while I tried to turn things around. I wasn't asking her to carry the burden forever, just for a while. But instead of supporting me, she turned every day into an argument. Even when she did help with money, she made sure I heard about it loudly. She'd complain for hours about how I had left a perfectly good job to pursue a business that was clearly failing, and to be fair, I understood her frustration. But what hurt the most was how quickly she started blaming me, as if none of this affected both of us, as if I had somehow dragged her into this mess just to watch her suffer. It wasn't just the money. That created the cracks. The truth is, things between us had already been changing. We had hit a rough patch even before the financial pressure appeared. But once the money problems set in, those cracks widened into chasms we could barely bridge. We stopped communicating. The warmth disappeared. We weren't partners anymore. We were just roommates. At some point, I realized I was running out of options. I had been trying to keep the business afloat on my own, scraping by week after week, hoping for some kind of miracle. I didn't want to ask anyone for help, especially not my mother. I mean, she'd already done so much for me throughout my life. But pride doesn't pay the bills. In watching everything I built slowly crumble, that kind of pressure changes your perspective quickly. So one evening, I drove over to my mom's house. I told her everything, how the agency was sinking, how I'd lost my top clients, how I had tried to fix it quietly but couldn't manage it alone. I thought maybe she'd be disappointed or give me one of her "you should have known better" lectures. But she didn't. She listened, nodded slowly, and after a few seconds of silence, she stood up, walked to her drawer, pulled out a folder, and said, "Take this. It should cover what you need to get back on your feet." She gave me enough to restructure things, hire temporary consultants, revamp our proposals, and get our systems running again. It wasn't a magic fix, but it gave me breathing room. In the next few months, things did improve a little. I brought in a few new clients. They weren't as big as the ones I lost, but they helped stabilize the cash flow. I stopped waking up in cold sweats, fearing the office would shut down next week. But while the business was slowly recovering, the marriage wasn't. That was the difficult part. You'd think the financial relief would ease the tension between us. Instead, it just exposed how far apart we had grown. Michelle and I barely spoke. We did, it was superficial. We weren't spending time together, not because of work schedules, but because we stopped making an effort. We'd eat in the same room, but hardly make eye contact. We slept in the same bed, but felt like strangers. I tried. Sometimes, but it always ended with one-word answers or silence. We both knew something was breaking, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. So, we just lived like that for months. One evening, out of the blue, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was soft, but there was a seriousness in her tone I hadn't heard before. She asked if I could come see her the next day. I knew something wasn't right. The next day, I drove to her place, thinking maybe she just needed help with something around the house. But when I sat down, the look on her face told me this wasn't about leaky faucets or groceries. She told me she had ovarian cancer, and it wasn't a recent diagnosis. She had been living with it for nearly a year. It was already advanced. The treatments she'd been undergoing weren't working as she'd hoped. Her doctors told her it was time to stop thinking in terms of years and start thinking in terms of months. I sat there completely still, trying to process it, but everything felt like a blur. My mother was my anchor. Ever since my father passed away 12 years ago, she had been the one constant in my life. Hearing that I was going to lose her, it felt like the ground beneath me was about to crack wide open. I remember just sitting there, looking at her hands, thinking how many times those hands had held mine when life got tough. And now, I was the one being told to prepare to let go. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I tried to keep my agency running, tried to stay afloat professionally, but my heart wasn't in it. I was either at the hospital, sitting by her side, or mentally stuck in that hospital room even when I wasn't physically there. Watching someone you love slowly fade away is indescribable. I would sit there and hold her hand, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about nothing, because I didn't know how to talk about goodbye. I told Michelle what was happening, and at first she reacted with sympathy. She said all the right things. But as time went on, I started noticing how little she was actually present. She visited the hospital a few times, but not often. When I asked, she'd say work was overwhelming, or that she found hospitals depressing. I didn't press her. Truth be told, I'd already accepted that she and my mother never had a close relationship. They were cordial, polite even, but there was never that genuine warmth. So, I stopped expecting more. I didn't want to fight while I was already drowning emotionally. 2 months. That's how long my mom stayed in the hospital before her body. Gave up 2 months of watching the strongest woman I know slowly lose her strength. And when she finally passed, even though I had seen it coming, I still wasn't ready. She had always told me that when her time came, she didn't want a big fuss. She didn't want people flying in or making speeches. She wanted to be buried quietly, without delay. So, I made sure that's exactly what happened. I buried her the next day, just like she asked. Took care of everything. The funeral home documents, the service. I remember standing by her grave. Listening to the pastor speak and thinking, how do you keep going when the person who taught you how to survive is no longer here to guide you? That was the beginning of a very dark period in my life. One I thought I'd be facing with my wife by my side, but I would soon learn she had a different plan. A week after I buried my mother, I got a call that caught me off guard. It was from her lawyer. He asked if I could come by the office whenever I had a moment. I set the appointment for the next afternoon. Walking into that office felt heavy. I hadn't even begun to adjust to the fact that I couldn't just pick up the phone and hear my mother's voice. I expected the meeting to be about paperwork, maybe. To sign off on funeral costs or close her accounts. The lawyer pulled out a thick file. He'd told me that before her health worsened, my mother had restructured her finances. She didn't just leave behind money. She placed everything into a trust. I sat there quietly while he explained what that meant because, truthfully, I had no idea. Broke it down for me in simple terms. A trust is like a locked box that holds someone's money or assets. But only certain people can access it, and only under specific conditions. I was the only person listed in the trust. There were no other beneficiaries. Everything she had was all there for me. But it wasn't money I could just access the next day. She set it up with clauses that showed just how much thought she put into protecting me, even after she was gone. The most important clause stated I couldn't access the full amount until after a 3-year stability period. That meant I had to wait 3 years during which my life had to remain stable. No major personal disasters, especially no divorce. Top of that, if I ever got divorced during those 3 years, or if I was even in the middle of a divorce, my spouse would be completely cut off from ever touching a single cent of that trust. Not a penny, not indirectly, not through the courts, not even through negotiation. The money was completely shielded from marital property laws. I remember sitting there with the folder in my hands, just staring at it. My first reaction was confusion. I kept wondering why my mother would go to such lengths. Did she not trust Michelle? Did she not trust me? Was this her being overly cautious? Or did she see something in Michelle that I had ignored? But the truth is, my mother had always been private and careful. She never told me how much she was worth, never showed off, never bragged. She just lived quietly and apparently planned quietly too. I didn't question her choices. Part of me knew deep down that she just wanted to be sure I was protected. No matter what happened, I left the office that day in a daze. I told Michelle that I'd met with the lawyer and that my mom left me an inheritance. I didn't mention the trust. I didn't talk about the waiting period or the clauses. I figured it wasn't the right time, and honestly, I didn't think it would matter. When I told her about the inheritance, she barely looked up from her phone. She said your mom was so organized. Maybe she didn't know what to say or was trying to be careful not to seem greedy. But now I know better. Her reaction was calculated. She was already thinking ahead. I just didn't know it yet. 2 weeks after I told Michelle that my mom had left me an inheritance, I got served on a regular workday. I was at the office, in the middle of reviewing reports, when a man walked in and asked for me by name. He was a process server. He handed me a sealed envelope and said, "You've been served." When I opened the envelope, I felt like the floor dropped beneath me. It was a notice of petition for dissolution of marriage. In plain terms, Michelle was filing for divorce. The stated reason was irreconcilable differences. I just sat there for a minute, stunned. Sure, we hadn't been perfect lately. Our communication had dwindled, and things between us weren't like they used to be. but we hadn't even argued recently. There were no warning signs. No, we need to talk conversation, just that letter. When I got home that evening, I walked straight to her and asked why. Why are you divorcing me without even trying to talk to me first? She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at me properly. She just said, "We've grown apart. Let's be adults about it." Then she walked away as if she had already made peace with whatever she had planned. I didn't even know how to react. I stood there feeling like I was speaking to a stranger. From there, the divorce process began to drag on for months. It was slow. It was draining. It felt like being stuck in a never-ending storm. During mediation, Michelle came in aggressively. Her lawyer confidently demanded 50% half of all present and future marital assets. The key words there, future assets. She assumed that included the inheritance from my mom. I hadn't told her the fine details of how it worked because, frankly, I didn't think I needed to. I hadn't even touched the money yet. Everything was still locked away in a trust, just as my mother had, arranged before she passed. What Michelle didn't know, and what her lawyer apparently didn't bother to verify, was that my mom had put very strict conditions around the inheritance. And if I were in the middle of a divorce during that period, my spouse was completely cut out. During one of the mediation sessions, the trust's legal structure finally came up. My lawyer brought in the documentation and explained it. He laid it all out. How the inheritance wasn't part of the marital estate, how it had never been deposited into our shared accounts, and how it was legally protected by those clauses. I'll never forget the look on Michelle's face when it hit. She looked like someone had pulled the rug right out from under her. Her lawyer glanced through the document, flipped back and forth, and finally leaned back in his chair and muttered, "We should reconsider our position." You could tell he was stunned, too. He thought they had a solid claim, but they had no leg to stand on. She had made her move way too early and with the wrong assumptions. Her plan, if you can even call it that, completely backfired. In the end, the divorce went through, but without any access to the inheritance, Michelle only received what was available from our actual shared marital assets. And trust me, there wasn't much left by then. The settlement she received didn't even come close to what she thought she was walking away with. In fact, most of it was swallowed by her legal fees. But still, she wasn't happy. After the settlement, she lashed out, called me selfish, said I was evil, said I planned everything with my mom to screw her over. I'll just be honest with you, I didn't hold back. I told her directly when I first sat with the lawyer and heard all the clauses in the trust. I thought my mom went too far. I really did. But after seeing what you pulled off here, I get it now. She knew exactly what you were capable of. She saw something in you I refused to see, and she protected me from it. That was the last real conversation we had. The divorce was finalized about a year after it all began. She went her way. I went mine. But it didn't end there. Some months after the divorce was finalized, Michelle reached out to me again. It came as a message late one evening, just a direct confession. She was drowning in debt, and now it was all crashing down on her at once. She said she didn't know who else to turn to. She said she felt stuck, for a moment, just a moment. I felt that old instinct tug at me, the part of me that once would have moved mountains to help her. But I didn't. I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm sorry you're going through this, Michelle, but I can't save you. I truly wish you well." I just left it at that, because here's the truth. When someone shows you who they are, especially at your lowest, you believe them. When they try to cash in on your grief, you don't go back and hand them another chance to do it again. That was the last time we ever spoke. Looking back, I feel grateful for the warning signs, for the heartbreak that opened my eyes, and even for the silence that came after. I won't lie and say it didn't hurt. It did. I lost my mother and my marriage. In the same season of life, that kind of pain changes a person, but it also wakes you up.